John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, first published in 1937, is a classic American novella about friendship, dreams, and survival during the Great Depression. The story follows George Milton and Lennie Small, two migrant workers who travel through California seeking employment while sharing a dream of someday owning a small farm and building a better life together. Steinbeck's literary style is direct, realistic, and deeply symbolic, combining vivid descriptions of the California landscape with natural dialogue and carefully constructed scenes that often give the novella the quality of a stage play. The story explores themes of friendship, loneliness, dreams, poverty, responsibility, power, prejudice, and the harsh realities faced by society's most vulnerable people. Of Mice and Men remains important because of its compassionate portrayal of people searching for dignity and belonging in an unforgiving world, and its enduring questions about friendship, hope, and the painful choices people sometimes make for those they love. The story starts with George Milton and Lennie Small walking through a quiet riverbed in rural California. The place is peaceful, with trees, water, and the distant shape of the foothills. But the two men are not simply enjoying the scenery. They are migrant ranch workers on their way to a new job, and the bus driver has left them farther from the ranch than he should have. George is small, sharp, and alert, while Lennie is huge, childlike, and dependent on George to guide him. As they stop by the river, Lennie drinks too much water, and George warns him that he will make himself sick. Their conversation quickly shows that Lennie has trouble remembering things and does not understand his own strength. George notices that Lennie is carrying a dead mouse in his pocket. Lennie only wants to pet it because he loves soft things, but he has killed it without meaning to. George takes the mouse away, frustrated and worried, because this same weakness has caused trouble before. George reminds Lennie that they have just fled wheat, where Lennie frightened the girl by grabbing the soft fabric of her dress and refusing to let go. The townspeople believed he had attacked her, forcing George and Lennie to run. George tells Lennie that when they reach the ranch, he must keep quiet and let George do the talking. He also gives Lennie an important instruction. If anything bad happens, Lennie must return to the same clearing by the river and wait for him. That night, George loses his temper and complains that his life would be easier without Lennie. But when Lennie offers to go away and live alone, George softens. He tells Lennie their favorite dream. Someday, they will save enough money to buy a small farm of their own. Unlike other ranch workers, who drift through life lonely and rootless, George and Lennie have each other. On their farm, they will grow food, raise animals, and Lennie will tend the rabbits. The dream comforts them both, giving their hard life a shape and a purpose. The next day, they arrive at the ranch bunkhouse and meet Candy, an old handyman who has lost one hand. The boss questions George and Lennie about being late. George answers for Lennie, which makes the boss suspicious, so George claims Lennie is his cousin and that he looks after him because Lennie was injured as a child. The boss assigns them to a work team under Slim, the respected mule driver. George warns Lennie again not to talk too much and becomes irritated when Candy overhears their conversation. Soon they meet Curly, the boss's aggressive son. Curly is small, jealous, and eager to prove himself by picking fights with bigger men. He immediately targets Lennie. Candy explains that Curly has recently married a flirtatious young woman, and his insecurity has become worse. When Curly's wife appears at the bunkhouse, George sees danger at once. Lennie thinks she is pretty, but George orders him to stay away from her. Slim enters and quickly earns George's trust. He recognizes that George and Lennie's friendship is unusual in a world where most men are alone. Slim has a dog that has just given birth to puppies, and Lennie becomes excited when he learns he may get one. Carlson, another ranch hand, suggests that Candy's old dog should be shot because it is smelly, useless, and suffering. The idea hangs over Candy painfully because the dog has been his companion for years. After work, George tells Slim how he came to care for Lennie. At first, George used to take advantage of Lennie's innocence, even making him do foolish things for amusement. But after Lennie nearly drowned because of one of George's tricks, George felt ashamed and began protecting him seriously. George also explains what happened in Weed and Slim understands that Lennie is not mean, only dangerously unaware of his strength. Carlson continues pressuring Candy to let him kill the old dog. Slim gently agrees that the animal is suffering, and Candy finally gives in. Carlson takes the dog outside and shoots it. Candy lies silently facing the wall, devastated. Later, he tells George that he should have shot the dog himself instead of letting a stranger do it. That moment foreshadows the hard choice George will eventually face with Lennie. That same evening, Lennie asks George to tell the farm story again, and Candy overhears. When he learns that George knows of a real place for sale, Candy offers his savings if he can join them. Because Candy has money from losing his hand and years of work, the dream suddenly seems possible. For the first time, the farm is not only a fantasy. George realizes they might actually make the down payment after a month of labor. The hopeful moment is interrupted by Curly's jealousy. Curly comes in angry after suspecting Slim of being with his wife. The other men mock him, and because he cannot fight Slim, Curly turns on Lennie, who is smiling to himself about the rabbits. Curly punches Lennie repeatedly, until George orders Lennie to fight back. Lennie grabs Curly's hand and crushes it. Slim warns Curly not to get George and Lennie fired, or everyone will know how badly he lost. Curly agrees to keep quiet, and George reassures Lennie that he has not lost the right to tend the rabbits. The next night, while most of the men go into town, Lennie wanders into Crooks's room in the stable. Crooks, the black stable hand, is isolated because segregation keeps him out of the bunkhouse. At first he tells Lennie to leave, but Lennie's innocence wears down his resistance. Crooks talks about loneliness and the pain of being excluded. He teases Lennie cruelly by suggesting that George may not return, but when Lennie becomes frightened and angry, Crooks backs away. Lennie tells Crooks about the farm, and Crooks dismisses it as another impossible dream. He has heard countless ranch hands imagine owning land, only to watch nothing happen. But when Candy joins them and explains that they already have money and a real place in mind, Crooks begins to believe. For a brief moment, he even asks if he might come along and work for no wages, simply to belong somewhere. Curly's wife interrupts the fragile hope. She complains that the men have left behind only the weak ones and speaks bitterly about her own loneliness. She says she once dreamed of becoming an actress but ended up married to Curly, a man she does not love. Candy and Crooks try to make her leave, but she uses her power as a white woman to threaten Crooks, reminding him how easily she could destroy him with an accusation. Crooks retreats into silence. When the men return, he withdraws his request to join the farm, pretending he never meant it. On Sunday afternoon, Lennie sits alone in the barn with his dead puppy. He has accidentally killed it by handling it too roughly, and he worries that George will be angry and will not let him care for the rabbits. Curly's wife comes in and begins talking to him. Lennie remembers George's warning not to speak to her, but she reassures him that the others are busy outside. She tells him about her failed dreams and how trapped she feels in her marriage. When Lennie says he likes touching soft things, Curly's wife lets him stroke her hair. She warns him not to mess it up, but Lennie becomes too excited and holds on too tightly. She panics and screams. Terrified that George will hear and be angry, Lennie covers her mouth. As she struggles, he shakes her and accidentally breaks her neck. Once again, Lennie has killed without meaning harm, but this time the damage cannot be undone. Lennie tries to hide the body in the hay, then remembers George's instruction and flees to the clearing by the river. Candy finds Curly's wife and calls George. George understands immediately what has happened. Candy asks whether the farm can still happen, but George knows the dream is over. Curly demands revenge and gathers the men into a hunt. Carlson's gun is missing, and everyone assumes Lennie has taken it, though George has actually taken it himself. At the riverbed, Lennie waits as George told him to do. He imagines Aunt Clara scolding him and then imagines a giant rabbit telling him that George will abandon him. When George arrives, he is strangely quiet. Lennie expects anger, but George cannot truly deliver the old scolding. Instead, he comforts Lennie and tells him again about their farm. He describes the rabbits, the freedom, and the place where no one will be mean to Lennie anymore. As the voices of the hunting party come closer, George tells Lennie to look across the river and imagine the farm. Lennie is happy, believing they are about to go there. George raises Carlson's gun and shoots Lennie in the back of the head, sparing him from Curly's mob and from a more brutal death. When the men arrive, George lets them believe he took the gun from Lennie and shot him in self-defense. Only Slim understands the truth. He tells George that he had to do it and leads him away with quiet compassion. Curly and Carlson cannot understand George's grief because they never understood the bond between the two men. In the end, the dream of the farm dies with Lennie, and the story leaves behind the loneliness of men who long for home, friendship, and mercy in a world that rarely gives them any.